All right, welcome back. We are Game 2004, that's Game Engines 2 in the winter 2026 semester at Georgian, and it's week 6, part 1 of our broadcast and recording. Couple things to talk about is our schedule. We're sitting at the bottom of, pretty much, the bottom of the first half of the semester. This week is about level transitions. We'll talk about that. But I wanted to talk about a few issues. And one of them is our due dates. We have to talk about that. Well, the other one is maybe even more important than that, which is our exam for next week. So due dates, what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to extend all the assignment 2 due dates until Sunday to give everyone a couple more days. That's including AI and multiplayer. So I'm gonna kind of you're gonna see those changes coming up. And the reason for this is because, one, I've been away. So I was kind of async on Friday, and then I didn't do it until Saturday. It's the way it worked out. I've been getting some requests from students who need more time for different reasons. Sometimes it's time management, sometimes it's whatever. I know that some people have had some things going on. And they've been asking me for kind of extensions. So instead of like managing each individual extension, saying, yeah, you can get an extension, and you can, yeah, that's a good reason. Let's just do it till Sunday. And this way everyone has an extension until Sunday, and I think that's reasonable. It'll give more people a chance to do everything they need to do for assignment 2. Okay, so hopefully that's okay with you. You guys okay with that? Hopefully you are. Okay. Yeah, so I think it's going to give people a little bit more time, and I think that's good. On the thing for next week, and let's talk about what we're doing this week. So this week we're talking about level transitions, interior to exterior, exterior to interior. We're going to talk about that, how to do those things properly in Unreal Engine, and here I've made the assignment 2 due date change. It's official for this course, but I want to start with an exam review. Okay, so let's talk about that first. So one thing is that we've been talking about exterior design for a couple weeks. Weeks 2 and 3 were dedicated to exterior design. You guys have had a chance to create that with your assignment 1. I am working on marking those, believe it or not. And it included things like landmarks and readable terrain, I think is a good way of putting it, sight lines, reasons for the terrain to be there, all that kind of stuff. We talked about the technical part of terrain creation and all that kind of stuff. All that is going to be included, in your exam. And we'll talk about how we're going to do that in a bit. So the most important thing is, because we're talking this week about transition, we need to understand what that exterior space is. Again, I don't want large exterior spaces. Like, hopefully when I get to some of your stuff, it's not a massive world that you've made. That's a lot of time to spend creating your world and managing it and all that kind of stuff. For this example, that's not what we want, and we want you to focus, the professors want you to focus on your main game project, which is for Level Up and for Rise. Then, weeks 4 and 5, that's including last week, we talked about interior spaces. So modular design, we talked about scale, sightlines again, lighting, and a bunch of other stuff. And there's some questions you should always ask when you're making interior spaces. You're working on your assignment 2 now, which is, are the gameplay spaces functional? Do they make sense? The things that you're making, it's a plan. It's not random, in terms of how you place everything. And then from a transition perspective, which is this week, we want to, kind of connect these design decisions you made. You've made design decisions for how your level should be laid out, and interior, from an interior perspective, you need to be able to transition from one room to the other, and that may require some care. And then finally, we're talking this week about transitions, and it's going to be a bunch of things. We're going to move from one lighting set to another, potentially from one room to another. There's going to be, different scales. Sometimes you'll be in a room that the character feels quite small because it's a massive room. Sometimes it's going to be a room where it's a room of transitions, a tunnel of some kind, or a stairway or something else that's going to move you from one place to the other. The connection between two rooms, and those kind of things. And the idea here is, good transitions really, kind of like prepare the player. You're going to move from one room to the other. We used Elden Ring last week as a case study, and that game is full of transitional areas where you move from one room to the other. You get a break sometimes in the corridors, sometimes not, right? When you're moving around and navigating in that game. But the things we want to avoid is where, the transitions break the immersion, where the player can actually see the seams in the level, where geometry that's not finished, or let's say, or whatever is shown. Anything like that breaks the immersion of the player is a bad thing, bad for transitions. All right, so that's what we're talking about really this week. So next week, what I want to do is we're going to have a practical exam assignment, and I got to talk about this from what I'm probably going to have to do, guys, because again, as I said, the reason why I was remote last week, and luckily we're remote this week for myself, is because I'm taking care of my wife. She's had a procedure at the hospital, and there's no one to do it for her, just me. This is just what it is. I'm recording it so you guys know, if someone watches this video or whatever, why, the reasons why it's going to be. And my thoughts are, that's not going to change for next week, which means next week is going to be remote for me. Unfortunate, I don't want to do it. I prefer to be in person 100%, but it means that your exams will be exam assignments, not in-person exams. Positive about that, you have more time. I'm still going to measure all the exams for each of the courses for 3 hours, but so that's one thing, you're going to have more time. Positive about that, it is individual and all that kind of stuff that you're going to be getting. I'll probably release the exams earlier in the week, Sunday, Monday time frame. Next week I will create a video for them and post the videos, kind of probably in Discord, or maybe Blackboard. We'll see how it goes. And then on top of that, the idea is that as soon as you get the details for the exams, which will come like early next week, you have the entire week to get it done, right? So you can choose when to space out your exams. Now, in terms of meeting times, I'm still going to meet with you at the same time. So like Wednesday next week from 12 to 3, I'll probably start off at 12, see how you guys are doing. I'll show up there for questions, Q&A for this course and the other courses if you want. So there'll be 3 touch points. So we'll be able to get together, around 12 o'clock on Wednesday, Thursday at 3, and Friday at 1. Okay, that's kind of how we're going to play it out. Now, Friday next week, I do have to go back to Toronto, and that's another reason why I have to be remote. So it's going to be touch and go. It's not going to be a long time in terms of how long I can spend on Friday, and if I can, I may move the time frame for our connection, our session, up to 12. We'll see. We'll let you know. All right, but that's how it's going to go for next week. I'm sorry. I have to apologize in advance for this. It's out of my control. I want to make sure we continue to deliver the curriculum for this semester for all 3 courses. But at the end of the day, it's, when you're taking care of somebody, family comes first. That's how I see it. I see the same thing for you guys. So it's like, you got to do what you got to do, right? I have to admit something to you guys, and straight up, I'm not a good nursemaid. I'm not. It's a hard thing to do. I really respect what nurses do all the time, and because honestly, it's a hard thing. It's lots of concentration. I've had lots of sleepless nights over the last little while because lots of pain that's going on and everything else that I have to kind of manage. Not for me, but for my wife. So it is what it is. I'm just being honest and telling you this, and that's the reason why it's happening the way it's happening next week. Otherwise, like I said, it'd be normal operation. I have a feeling that we will get back to normal after the break, after our mid-semester break. I'm going to need that time I'm getting paraphernalia to help out, my wheelchair and a bunch of other stuff to to do what I have to do. But for this week, guys, it's been pretty tough. I'll have to tell you, it's a lot of challenge and not a lot of free time. So it is what it is. So hopefully you understand that. But that's thanks, man. Hopefully you understand that kind of stuff, so you understand why it's happening, and it's we're gonna get through it. It's one of those things that happens, and when you have an injury like this, my wife had an injury, so that's what happens, right? So on this, then, one thing to note is that we're going to, because of this stuff where it's going to be like remote next week. Yeah, you're probably going to start for this course. You're going to get a starter project. The starter project is going to have some assets that I'm going to give you ahead of time. I'm going to try and make the starter project not too large, right? Because with assets for exterior and interior, it can be pretty hairy. So I'll give you some stuff to start with, to get going. But what you're going to do most likely is using the assets I provide, right, within the week. Everyone's got to use the same assets. So there's less, choices in terms of using your own assets and that kind of stuff. Then you're going to be asked to design something. You'll probably be given some references, that kind of stuff. And then I'll give you what I want you to do from an exterior to interior. But in 1 week, you're going to do kind of like some similar things that you did with your assignment. Everybody has to participate individually. So you're going to do it on your own. There'll be the video and all that kind of stuff by the end of the week. This one will take you some time to do, all right? Because of, it takes a long time to kind of make this stuff. So I'm going to try and get you not to create too many original assets, but actually use the assets I've given you, and then modify the scene and all that stuff to make things go. Okay, so that's kind of what it's going to happen. Like next week, you'll get all the details Sunday, Monday. I got to, kind of put all that together for you guys and modify the things that I have planned. But it is what it is. Questions around the exam next week that's coming up and your assignment too. Anyone have any issues with any of those things? If you do, please hit me up for, do we need to record a video? Yes, you do. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was going to say, please hit me up with office hours. They quickly fill up around this time, especially next week. My schedule should be up to date, and if I can't do it, I'll let you know. But what I'd like you to do is, if you need me for office hours for whatever reason, like you have a question, you don't understand how things are working or whatever, even up to the end of this week, if you want to meet with me tomorrow or Friday, I think there's still some space available. Please do, right? Because we can spend some time to kind of shore up some of the stuff that you're missing or things that's not working, especially if you're assignment 2 or 1B, as an example. I know some people are having challenges with AI and with multiplayer and a bunch of other stuff. Let me know, guys. I want to be there to help. Okay, so that's what's happening. Today, let's talk about level transitions. Was it allowed to build off the repo for assignment 2? Just wanted to check. Yeah, you could. Like, for example, if are you talking about for multiplayer or for which one? Or for this one? AI. Yeah, I mean, I've given you stuff, right? So the idea is if your assignment 1 was bad somehow and you couldn't get things going, that's fine. But remember that Arrive, the thing that I showed you for Arrive, is incomplete, right? You need to tweak Arrive a little bit. So the answer is yes, always. If I don't want to give you like to sandbag people and say, well, you didn't do assignment 1, so you can't do assignment 2. That's not reasonable, right? So it's got to be something that's reasonable. And remember, these assignments that I'm giving you are like you follow along and you do, for the most part, with some minor things that you're going to be putting together. The assignments are taking place of our in-class exercises. Really, it's just a culmination of all the in-class exercises in one to give you time to do everything with you and your partner. But at the end of the day, what I'm going to be doing for you guys is just like, giving you a chance to, follow along and get her done and have experience doing that with Unreal Engine and all those things. So I think that's how I want you to think about it. I don't want you to think about it as like, you know, you have to create everything from scratch and all that kind of stuff. I know some people have done that, and that's fine. There's a lot more. You get a lot more experience if you start with less and you do more, but it requires a lot more work, right? So at the end of the day, you know, I do respect, you know, people that, you know, you have time to do things that you need to do, but you also have a lot of things coming from me, some stuff from Steve. You know, you got stuff with Connor, you got your electives potentially, or other things you're doing, plus your personal life. Some people have to work and all that kind of stuff. So I respect all that, and that's why we did this. You know, I kind of elected to do it this way, where you have larger assignments that are 15% instead of individual and class exercises every week. This semester would have killed you, and most likely killed me, right? So there's no way I could have managed all that, you know, and I don't expect you to. So that's why we're doing it this way. So to answer your question, long answer, Logan, yes. Yeah. It's just insane. It's like, I mean, again, if I'm doing one course and I'm getting you guys to do it, and it's all individual, wonderful, wonderbar, no problem, we can do that. But for 3, there's no way, and it just, there's a lot, and also, it's also going to distract you. The big one, it's going to distract you from doing what you're really here to do this semester, which to me is work on your game. The game is like, you know, the game that you're making for Level Up is really important. I've seen some stuff. You know, some students have shown me some things. Still lots of work to do for a lot of you. You know, in terms of where you are, where you sit right now, in terms of your actual game. Remember that myself, Connor, and the other professors are going to be figuring out who's going to go to Level Up. I believe that's week 12. That is what we're thinking about. So that means you only have, like, we're sitting at week 6. Sounds like a long time, but it's not a long time. You don't get a lot of time to get together and do things. Plus, keep track and keep up to date with all your assignments. So please meet with people, make some time, carve out some time during the week where you guys can have regular meetings with your team outside of class, outside of Connor's class, to get your stuff done. It's a lot, but if you really want to go to Level Up and have a great experience, it's going to add to your, you know, to your resume and to your portfolio and all that stuff, potentially to get hired at some point in the future, or even just experience doing it, you know, which is something maybe you want to do for your own indie studio or for yourself, right? So that's why you're here. So let's get into level transitions now. So level transitions, you know, what is it, right? It's basically when we move from interior to exterior or exterior to interior. Again, I really think about transitions as like this journey, the hero's journey here, where you're moving your character interactively, right? Or whatever that is, vehicle, character, you know, even the camera sometimes, you know, from one part of the level to the other. Okay, it doesn't always apply. You know, for example, if you're playing a top-down, you know, turn-based strategy game like Civilization, there's really not necessarily a huge level transition other than, you know, Civilization 7 there is, because you're moving from one age to the other. But for the most part, the level transitions in like a game like that would be like, okay, we're moving to the next, you know, age, and that's the level transition, moving to the next age. But for the most part, if you're playing a game where there are different levels, interior, exterior, and I'm thinking about third-person perspective kind of games or first-person games, for example, like Fallout or, you know, any one of those kind of games, Elden Ring, other, you know, third-person perspective games, I'm not really a fan of. Like I said, Expedition 33, sue me, I just don't like it. You know, I love the you know, the beauty of it and everything else, but the story's not for me. And I was never really a Final Fantasy kind of person. So anyways, when it comes to this kind of stuff, that's what we're talking about. We're moving from one gameplay zone to another. We're moving from one streamed level to the other. That's what we're doing. And transitions affect all kinds of stuff. Orientation. You're going down an elevator and you're looking in one direction and then the elevator opens behind you. That happens in real life too, right? Pacing, for sure. You know, as an example, when you're moving from one thing to the other, you're transitioning through you know, through the mist, you know, in Elden Ring or Dark Souls, and now you're into a fight. You know it's coming. It's you know, there's a big boss level coming up, or a boss fight, or whatever it is, even if it's a mini boss. So So that's the level transition. That's what it does. And in Unreal Engine, we want to use different systems to make that level loading happen. Now remember, today we're not going to be talking technically about level streaming. That's going to happen coming up weeks 8 and 9 when we come back from break. So like that's course weeks 8 and 9. Calendar week is 9 and 10. So it's coming up, but after the break, we're going to talk about level streaming, like actually doing it with with Unreal Engine. It's kind of cool what you can do with it, and the way you can load and unload your level in manually. You can also do it automatically, and you can also use world partitioning, which is what we're going to be talking about a bit as well. So I always think about it like this. I think about it's almost like, and again, this is a story thing too. Compression to expansion. You're kind of in a corridor, and now you're moving into a big place. You're compressed. You're kind of limited or constrained. Maybe constrained is a better word than compression. Expansion to compression. You're moving in from the exterior world to the interior world, a smaller area. You're going into a cave. You're moving into a place where there's a bit of a bottleneck now. And it's positive for you sometimes, especially if you're fighting enemies. In a larger area, larger areas are more dangerous a lot of times because you can get hit from different sides and that kind of thing. Especially, I'm thinking about it from a first person or third person perspective kind of game right now. Whereas, a corridor, positives and negatives. I remember playing Oblivion and going through one of those Oblivion towers, in the Oblivion gate, and it was like pretty crazy. You go up and you see this crazy guy, and you're like, there's no place to go, right? You have to fight him or run, right? Those are the things, especially if they're tougher than you are, as an example. But on the plus side, you're not fighting 4 or 5 of those guys, right? You're in a tunnel, you're in a bottleneck. Even when we're playing Dungeons and Dragons on a tabletop, it's kind of the same thing. You want to get yourself into cover. You want to get yourself into a place where, you're going to, where enemies can only fight you 1 or 2 abroad, right? You don't want them to go behind you. You don't want to be blindsided by enemies that are ranged combatants. You don't want those kind of things to happen as well. And so you get yourself into a place like this. So tunnels are pretty good for that. Or other constrained areas, smaller rooms, and that kind of stuff. But you don't want to be trapped. You don't want to get into a room when you're playing. I'm talking gameplay strategy here now. You don't want to get into like a little storeroom, where people are coming at you, and then there's no escape. You can't run, right? So you want to give yourself a way to run. But in compression, expansion, and expansion to compression, this idea from moving from a big space to a small space, from a small space to a big space, is also part of transitioning. Moving through portals and doors. We do that all the time. Cave entrance, a doorway, an elevator, those kind of things. We do that. And, what we want to do a lot of time is, we use doors, and different games use doors for a way to load the next level, right? So a good example is Fallout. When you're moving from an exterior level to an interior level, in Fallout, it's not a streamed experience. It's not like you can move from exterior to interior unless it's completely open. Like it's like the building has been destroyed and there is no exterior. As an example, or there is no enclosed space. It's not encapsulated. Within a finer space, right? But a lot of times, let's say I'm just looking at Fallout as an example. You load the new level, right? That's just the way Bethesda decided to do that. When it comes to Fallout. I'm not sure if that's the most modern way, but it's still done in many places, in many games now. And so that's what it is. The portal basically is an illusion for us loading a new level. And then, the building, which is really weird to look at it this way, but it's almost like when you look at the Commonwealth, or the Apocalypse, the Wasteland. I've been watching Fallout on TV too. It's really just a lot of empty space, right? With some enemies all over the place, with kind of like these blocks, these triggers that transition you to another level. That's all it is, and then you come back, right? And they did that from a lot of reasons. One of them is performance, right? I mean, if I unload a level and reload another level, or load this other level, then the performance clearly is easier for me to handle, especially if the other level that I'm loading is heavy duty, lots of items, different enemies, whole other mechanics, lighting. Like there's a lot, right? So when you move, it's more of a control perspective from moving one thing to the other. But a good example is Unreal. Unreal allows you to do things, not like that actually by streaming, which we're going to talk about in weeks 8 and 9. And Elden Ring is a good example of where they don't necessarily load levels. Now there are places they do load. A lot of times it's when we're moving from one scene to the other, or if they, your world has changed, some parts of it have exploded or whatever, and then the world, you do load a whole other world. But for the most part, or at least part of the world loads, but they don't do it that way. That's just the way they've decided to do it. Everything is an open world, but it's also it's not something that necessarily has to load, right? You don't sit there. There's no lag, from one part to the other, which is kind of interesting the way they're able to do that and still maintain really great performance. Which also talks about some other games that use Unreal Engine nowadays, where Unreal Engine is still pretty laggy on some of the games that are out there. So one thing that we want to also focus on, and you know what, I should probably release these slides because I always forget to do that. Let's do that here. One thing that we want to focus on is, before we talked about the technical aspect of things, we want to talk about the design aspect first. So again, for me, it's always design before technology. I don't want to think necessarily about the engine. It could be any engine. It could be your engine, whatever. In your mind, you want to think about, why do you have this tunnel? Is it for a reason? Like, why did you offer this other side, area? Do you want to give the player agency, or do you want to funnel the player into do you want them to go there because they need to fight someone? That's the only way they're going to get through to the next part, as an example. Is your conscious design choice, is that the way you've created your level in a way to give a player the experience you want them to have? Sometimes it's what we want to do is we want to provide them training. We want to give them the ability for them to to be onboarded and understand how that level is forming. Question for you guys, the ones that have you've been working on your game now, for a while, the game from last semester and this semester. How's your training stuff going? Is it do you have some kind of like tutorialization built out properly? Is that working?
I actually made a tutorial system for our game early on. It was very simple initially, just to really serve as play testing. It was basically just prompts appearing at certain points in the first level, telling you like controls and stuff. But recently I've decided to do away with it and come up with something a little bit better. So actual maybe pop-ups or more in-depth explanations instead of just text appearing on the screen. More like actually related to the level, since the level was also overhauled recently.
That's good. I mean, these are design choices, right? So, a lot of times, and again, it doesn't matter which game you're looking at these days, but if you like it or not. But Elden Ring, that's our case study, does it in one way, where you go to the Cave of Knowledge, and that Cave of Knowledge tells you how to play the game for the most part. And then when you learn new things, there's some, especially in the beginning when you're first playing, they give you more and more stuff. Oh, look, there's a new thing you just found out for the first time, and then they give you a little bit more. Again, my thoughts are, when it comes to tutorialization, that's something you need to push your characters towards, but also, and this is really important, give them a chance to opt out. If they're playing it for the second time, they're doing a second playthrough, don't force them to go and do the tutorial again, right? If they know how to play, give them a chance to opt out of it and, just walk right by, okay? Right? Because otherwise it's exactly the same. Or even Oblivion for the first time. If you guys ever played that old Oblivion, Elder Scrolls 3, right? It's pretty crazy, right? It's like, it pushes, is it 4? No, it's Elder Scrolls 4. But yeah, Skyrim forces you to do it. Oblivion, there's a bunch of stuff that you just you have to do the tutorial again, and it's really a pain in the ass, right? So Elden Ring doesn't make you do it, right? Does Dark Souls 4, does Dark Souls 3 push you to do it? I think it does. I think you have to do it in Dark Souls 3.
It's less of. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go on.
In Dark Souls 3, it's like it's a part of the game to do.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
It's not framed as a tutorial. It's just like very simple.
And it doesn't take long. Like, you don't get a lot of direction in Dark Souls 3. You just, and actually I like that about the game, because it's like there's a lot of exploration. That what From Software wants you to do is explore the world, and you figure out the mechanics on your own, kind of thing. Some people don't look at it that way, and they're like, there should be more tutorialization. There should be internal maps. There should be all this kind of stuff. Like, one thing that's missing in Elden Ring and Dark Souls, as an example, is like you press the map button, all you see is the external map, but there's no internal maps, right? And people always complain about that kind of stuff. Same thing with Starfield. There's a game that was kind of mixed reviews. They had really bad maps in Starfield for a long time. It was like terrible, right? Now they've got some maps happening. It's still not that great compared to Fallout. Has great maps, and so does Elden Ring. Skyrim. Good maps, right? Once you've got the map, it shows you the map and everything else, and it helps guide the player. It's non-diegetic, 100% non-diegetic, right? It's like, how do you get that map? Well, as you go, if there's a fog of war, and then as you go, you learn it, that's okay. But, to me, I think maps are always helpful. So, but this is the kind of stuff, when you think about it, you push your character towards doing a tutorial level. There's got to be a reason why, or your player, there's got to be a reason why you want to do that. If they've done it for the first time, in my opinion, let them opt out. You don't have to, they shouldn't have to do that tutorial again. And that's why I like the change they made from software from Dark Souls to Elden Ring, where they said, you don't have to jump down that well. You can keep going. If you know how to play, you don't have to go to the Cave of Knowledge. You're good. So that's I think I kind of like that. And it's rightly named too, Cave of Knowledge, which is kind of like understanding what you need to do. So I think all these things are design considerations, things you got to figure out, like when you're moving from one thing to the other, and some of it is not just the visuals or what you're loading, but it's also sound, right? It's light, it's special effects, it's whatever else you want. For the player to feel, cutscenes, all that kind of stuff. All those things can frame the transition. Again, moving from one level to the other, and then you see this battlefield in front of you, and then all of a sudden, like, there's a cutscene. I mean, I'm not a fan of unskippable cutscenes. That I don't like, right? But if it's a cutscene and it's relevant to the story, and there's not that many of them. Like, if it's like cutscene after cutscene after cutscene, man, I'm not watching a movie, I'm playing a video game, right? I think there's got to be a balance, and some companies go crazy. Some game developers, they go crazy with cutscenes, because really cutscenes are kind of a transition, or they're trying to give you the story. But to me, I'd rather explore the story and figure some of it out on my own. If there's something that I need to find out about the story, then maybe the characters in the world are going to tell me, or there's things in the world that I'm going to pick up to figure things out. But sometimes cutscenes can like really bring that together and can make it really cool. Like some of the great cutscenes we've seen, like again in Elden Ring and other places, there's some really good stuff. But it's like, I don't want to see, a whole movie. I want to move on. Sometimes I feel like Expedition 33 is that. It's like cutscene after cutscene after cutscene. It's like, holy crap, man. Let me get moving, on stuff. Let me get playing. I want to play. I don't want to just watch, right? It's too much. So, character goes through a cracked wall. Yeah, I think it's neat. But again, this illusion of moving from one place to the other, where really we're loading, is something else, right? Trigger volumes. This is something that you can do a lot of times, which are easy to do. A lot of times when you walk through an area, right, they can do things like trigger cutscenes and change your music and adjust lighting exposure and do a bunch of different things. There might be a checkpoint that you're gonna save. You might see a visible thing that your game has just saved, as an example, or maybe there's going to be enemies that spawn or whatever. As soon as you cross the threshold from one thing to the other, you go on top of that hill. You see a hill and there's grave markers, and you go up there. Oh, skeletons start to spawn. Whatever it's going to be, and they start to spawn because you pass through an area where there's some kind of trigger volume. That trigger volume is easy to do, right? Yeah, right. It is 4 or 5 minutes because that's how it used to be. That's how long it took for you to load the level, right? And then later on, when you had a more powerful system, it loaded much faster, right? So, one thing that I noticed when it comes to companions and stuff like that, I have to talk about this too, just because I'm going to take a diversion here, an aside, is one thing that makes me crazy is when your companions don't come with you. Like they're stuck outside. You get into the elevator and then, suddenly they're teleported. They're inside the elevator with you. And, I understand why they do it. When you have a companion that's with you or whatever. They do it in a bunch of games like this too, but it's like they can't keep up with you. Or you can't keep up with them. They're getting you to follow along, and you're trying your hardest to kind of follow along, whether it's on horseback or on foot or through a spaceship or whatever, and you just can't follow along because they're so fast, right? Or they can't follow along because you're too fast. And it's kind of a pet peeve of mine. But anyways, these cutscenes and these transitions, it's through trigger volumes. You go through a portal, something happens. You cross the threshold from one thing to the other, and all of a sudden, it does things. And these little scripted scenes that you might see, a lot of times, they take control away from the player, right? And so it's just like I say when we develop for the web. If you're on a website, and this pop-up comes up and says, you're doing something wrong. Are you sure you want to do this? Kind of thing. If it happens a lot on a website, it's really irritating because it kicks me out of like what I'm doing, right? I'm trying to do something and the website's telling me, hey, this is what's going on. Unless it's super important, I'm deleting something, right? I'm leaving something that's unfinished and I'm going to lose my data, right? Or whatever. I'm just talking about a website right now. I hate it. I can't stand a pop-up, an alert that comes up. It's bad design, okay? In the same token, I really don't like when I lose control. I don't have control, and I have to watch a cutscene. It's unskippable, right? Something like that when I'm playing a game. That's bad, right? Every cutscene, every tutorial level, everything that takes away my player's agency, me, when I'm designing, is a bad thing. Let them skip it if they really want to. Some power players and power users are going to do that. Some professional gamers, they're gonna do like a speed run through stuff, and they're not even going to fight your enemies. They're just going to get to the end and get the treasure as fast as possible because that's their tactic, right? So let them do what they want to do is the answer. Let the player play the way they want to play, right? Don't push them unless it's absolutely necessary, unless it's going to promote the plot or you want to stop them because they need to fight this boss to go to the next scene. So from a portal perspective, it frames a bunch of spaces. It actually, creates that connection. Doors, doorways, like we said, archways, elevators, corridors, all this kind of stuff are the way we transition from one things to the other. They do a lot of really cool things. They block sightlines for us, which means they create anticipation and they reveal things when you open them up. Again, back to Elden Ring, when your character pushes, these massive doors open, it's kind of they do it for an effect. This is an important place you're moving. You're opening up a new world. You're revealing this next area or whatever. I really like when they do that kind of stuff. Again, I think From Software is like they're masters of level design, truly. And I think some of you said that last week as well. But it definitely, resets the pace. We're moving through a doorway, going up a set of stairs, climbing a ladder, whatever you're going to do. All these transition spaces are the spaces that allow your to get a little rest sometimes, or you can run away. Conduits that allow you to like move from one place to the other, right? All those things are ways that we can use, and we use portals for this a lot of time. And I consider a portal any kind of things, whether it's a gateway, like an actual magical gateway, teleporter, cave mouth, like it says here, any kind of archway or something, some kind of like, thing you're moving from one type of area to the other. you can create whatever effect you want. Think about that with your game, the one that you're making for level up, how it feels for the player to play that when they move through that portal. Make it big, make it important, make it awesome, so that they're, when they're doing that kind of thing. And then the one thing that we always want to think about is, lighting. Lighting is a big one, and we're going to talk about lighting today. We're going to actually do a little bit of a demo with Unreal Engine with lighting. I got to talk about that a little bit. But lighting is like going from exterior to interior, and whether you're having some kind of exterior weather effect or whatever going on, you got rain outside, you get a storm brewing, and you go from outside to inside, there's that, it becomes quieter. Your sound changes. You might hear the storm raging outside or whatever, or maybe like there's light effects coming from outside. But a lot of times, many games, even Elden Ring, as advanced as it is, for what it did, you don't always hear the weather from outside to inside. Once you're inside, you're inside. It's a whole other world. You don't have to worry about what happens outside. And the weather system kind of changes, just the way it does. But, the color transition, moving from, let's say, nighttime, you're kind of in a night scene, especially if you're doing things like day-night cycle in your game, and you're moving, let's say it's nighttime, you go into a dungeon, and you come out and it's daytime, right? That's a big thing for characters, for the player. The player, they have this transition that they've been in that place for a while. You know what I'm saying? Like they spent a long time in that dungeon or whatever, in that little cave, and then they've come out, and now they've come out to light again. Or they move from, the day and they go into a cave and they come out at nighttime, and now it's the night scene. And, we know bad things happen at night. Creatures come out at night, whether it's in Minecraft or in other kind of games. The game changes, when it comes to the way things are spawned and how things are done, right? So it's that lighting transition. Sound also is a big thing. You go from, wind outside to like, kind of an echoey interior, or a quietness, if you will, stillness that you can feel inside. So that the change in tone, the change in sound is a big thing. Or you might hear music changes. You're outside, and you've heard the music of the game and all that kind of stuff, because there's usually some kind of soundtrack that's going on with the game itself. And as soon as you move inside, the sound changes. Maybe the soundtrack is lower. Maybe it's changed into something else. And I always like the triggers that where you're in combat. Once you get into combat, that the battle banjo music of like Borderlands. I always think about that battle banjo. You're running away from like these skags in the beginning for Borderlands 1, and they're after you, and they're coming, and the music is like, is escalating. Oh, it's like you're going to be in trouble now. It's the first time you're playing, and it's really exciting to hear that kind of stuff, right? So all those things are that they add to the transition, as opposed to it's not just a visual thing, right? It's all those factors at once, and you can manage all that stuff, guys, as you make your game, right? So, so let's talk about this from a technical perspective. In Unreal Engine, there are 3 ways that you can really transition from one level to the other, and the first one is use the open level node. That's the way to do it. This is a hard load where you're hard loading a level, and you're unloading the other one. So once you do that, that's what happens. Then there's level streaming. Again, we're going to talk about level streaming week 8 and 9, I believe, and world partition streaming, which happens specifically for outdoor landscape kind of scenes. It's built in for that. You can also do it for interior scenes as well. Okay, so that's something that we can do. Those are the 3 ways. For the first one, when you want a hard load, I'm sure you guys have talked about this with Steve, yeah, where you can kind of use the open level node to open up a level. You guys have done that with Steve, hopefully, yeah. So what happens technically is the current world unloads, all the actors are destroyed, and the game mode resets. Okay, so this is the bad thing that happens. Your player respawns at the player start. That's what happens. Okay, so what about if you're moving from level 1 to level 2? There's some considerations to think about. So positive things about this is, it's a clean reset. When you come back into it, it's like literally just starting over again. It's really easy to implement. It's good for things like large world shifts, or if you're going to go from a large exterior to a large interior, like a whole interior level that is like massive or something like that. It's probably gets better to load, and that's going to happen in the elevator, right? Some kind of lift that's going to take you down, or you're going to go through a massive magical portal, right? And whatever that's going to be, it's going to do that load. The only time that really happens in Elden Ring is when you pass through those those sigils, right? I think it's the only time you actually load a whole other area because you're being transported somewhere else, or if you're going through a gateway. But negative thing about that, it does break the immersion a bit. If your player can see it, if they know the level is loading, and a good example of that is, when you're loading a level in Fallout or Outer Worlds, for example, Outer Worlds 2, they have those loading screens all the time. I think that's something that you have to think about. Loading screens, positives and negatives. It gives you a chance to have a sip of coffee or whatever while the screen loads, but it breaks you out of immersion. It gives you a break, but it also, kind of like makes you feel like you're in a game, not in a story, right? So, but it's really good for major biome changes. If you're going from one kind of place to the other, again, I always think about the Altus plane when you're in an Elden Ring, you're moving from, one place to the other. You're going to go through those elevators, a couple ways to get up there. But once you go up to that place, it's like, there's a big transition. You're loading a whole other thing, for the first time. It kind of feels like that. Major biome changes, completely separate maps. Like if you're moving to a place where you're not on that map anymore, you're somewhere else. And, I think Avowed did that pretty good. What I'm saying? Where they have a bunch of maps and you can go from any place that you want. I'm not sure if you guys played Avowed at all, but that was another one that Obsidian came up with. And by the way, Obsidian, they said that the two games that didn't make a lot of money this year that they released last year were Avowed and Outer Worlds 2. They said they just couldn't make a lot of money with those games. They took a long time to create, several years, and at the same time, smaller games that they made, as an example, they made more money with the small games that they were able to release quicker than these massive games. So I think that might be a shift that we might be seeing with some game developers as well, where they make smaller games that you can play, with this much short, with less commitment and that kind of stuff, and they make pretty good money. So so another really good place to use this like level loading stuff is when you're at the main menu. You're in the main menu and you're loading your game for the first time. Your load game. You're going to use the save game instance, if you will. So one thing that we have to think about when it comes to level loading in general, we're moving from one level to the other, is the game instance. The game instance is the main place that everything persists. So I had a conversation this week with Michael. Michael, thank you for that. And Michael asked me that question. He's like, hey, if I want to move from this thing to the other, what do we do? Game instance is the way to do that. And that's how we would do it for a non-multiplayer game. We would use the game instance because the game instance persists from one level to the other, which means if you want to store things like player data, that kind of stuff, right? A player object, or if you're playing a couch co-op game. I think, Michael, your game is a couch co-op game, yeah? Or some kind of split screen kind of co-op game. I think you were talking about that before. So then, just like, I don't know, maybe Joss, I was talking to Michael about Prime Ops. Yeah, player options, all that stuff is the game instance, because the game instance is this thing that's going to persist between levels. That's what you want to do, right? So, which is, to me, really good thing to understand how this all works. So you get the game instance from project settings, maps, and modes. That's where the game instance is where you kind of point to that. Then you make your own blueprint of type game instance, and inside there you can do whatever you want, just like any other blueprint that you create. So that's something that you should think about doing if you're having that. So a loading screen with loadouts. Let's say, for example, in Prime Ops, when we made it back in the day, we used actually Connor's engine. Connor made his own engine, and that was the game that we took to level up. But for that game, we had this loading screen, and the loading screen basically gave you those, like, 4 loadouts, right, as an example. And then the first loadout, you do your thing or whatever with, and then it remembers when you go from that level, into the play level. One thing to note is, if you're going to do that kind of thing, you need to let the player get ready. If you're playing couch co-op, each player has to get ready, and as soon as they're all ready to go, then you can transition to the gameplay. And the game instance class is a great way of doing that. The other thing to do is, if you want to save the game, any kind of save stats that you want to save for the character, stats that you want to save for the game, a good place to do it is here. However, another place to do it is in player state. There's also player session. There's a bunch of stuff that you can use that Unreal Engine gives you, to save some information for the player. But between levels, game instance is the way to go. Player state is for multiplayer. Player state works better for multiplayer than game instance. It does work, game instance, for both, but player state's always recommended. You can also save your data and persist your player information and your world information using save game. So a good example of that is, like, let's suppose your world, when it loads, there's certain things that you want to remember. Like, let's say, for example, you have a boss, and if the player kills the boss or whatever, or defeats the boss somehow without killing them, the boss is defeated, and then the game remembers. You don't have to defeat that boss again, as an example. That you can use, you can put that in a couple places. Game instance is a place to do it. You could do that. But then what about if I want to stop the game completely and then reload the game? You're going to used to have some kind of save game object to do that. And we're going to talk about saving and loading and the intricacies of that. I believe that's like week 10 and 11, where we talk about just saving and loading, how to do that properly, how to, different ways of saving, how to save, what data to save, and all that kind of stuff. We're talking about that around that time, so you'll have all that for me. I know it's coming a little late because, realistically, by then you should know how to do this, but we'll talk about it. Maybe it'll fill in a couple gaps of things that you're going to need to remember. So things to remember for this one is, when we're saving a game, you want to restore the stuff on load. You want to make sure that you save everything from your player state, their position. Sometimes their orientation is really, really important. For example, if you allow the player to save the game anywhere, right? And most games allow you to do that. Some games don't. Some games you have to be at a save spot in order for you to save your game, whatever that safe spot is. Maybe a safe area, fire, or whatever, to get to that position. It's almost like a checkpoint. If you're at the checkpoint, you can save. If you're outside of the checkpoint, sorry, you're gonna be teleported back. You lose all your unsaved your progress, and you're gonna go back to that previous save point. Positive and negative about that, hot and cold about that kind of game. It really depends on the experience you want to give your players, right? If you want that kind of thing, but whatever was changed up until that save point is something that you're going to persist. So persistent data is going to be saved somewhere on your computer, right? Whether it's on the computer or the platform somehow. If you're playing a mobile game, there's going to be different ways of saving that data. And even though there's a save game object, as an example, there's nothing to stop you from using databases and that kind of stuff that's like on the network. That's also a place to save that you can potentially allow players to save their stuff. Okay, so that's other ways of doing things. So remember, hard loads are simple, but state management is your responsibility, right? So if you have to maintain state, that means you have to save all kinds of stuff for your player to give them the same, kind of put them back where they started so they can play again. You want them to replay the game. The other one that we want to talk about, which is very interesting, and is level streaming. So what you do is you create these sub-levels. Kind of neat, right? And it's really not that difficult. If you go to Window, Levels, we're going to talk about that in Unreal Engine. So if I was to show you this, here's the level that we're going to be working on today. But if I go to Window, right, as an example, there's a Levels, kind of panel that comes up, and you can see that it says persistent level, right? So it says game maps dungeon. In this case, that's the persistent level. What you can do here is you can actually add existing level. And what it'll do is it'll physically add that level to this one. Kind of neat, right? So that's how we're going to be doing the streaming. It's kind of an interesting way. There's lots of little, things to do when it comes to setting this up. There's ways of doing it automatically, and there's ways of doing it manually. So again, you can decide the different method you want to use. You can always load all the level stuff that you want, which means that as you're approaching that level, that area, as an example, you can make that the level load. When you're moving away from that area, you can unload that part of your world. Positive and negative, again, you really have to manage the performance manually yourself, right? So you get a feel how that works, especially when you're loading a big area. Sometimes loading small pieces at a time is probably the right thing to do, right? But again, that whole loading and unloading thing that you're doing, think about persistence, how you're going to persist all the changes that you've made, whether and it could be everything from, breaking a vase, like some kind of breakable or, destructible object in the game. That's got to stay broken, and it's got to stay in the exact same position for the most part, right? Anything like that you want to persist. And then when you reload, if you're reloading a game, or you're going back to a checkpoint, a previous slot, if you will, then that's got to persist. Whatever changes you made to that spot, that's where you've got to reload and reset to that level, right? So those are the things. So always loaded, blueprint, and volume. Those are the three ways of doing it. When it comes to blueprint streaming, there are a couple nodes we're going to use in week 8 and 9. One of them is load stream level by name, and then the other one is unload stream level by name. You can do that. Those are loading and unloading happens manually. So make visible after load is also a parameter. So as soon as it loads, it becomes visible. Should block on load and unload as an example. If the engine waits for loading to finish before continuing execution. So blocking means just like if it's synchronous or asynchronous. I'm not sure if you guys know what I mean by that, but if you're someone who's a web programmer or a person who's working with databases or any kind of remote resources, a lot of times servers, we request something and we get a response. Request, response from the server, right? And the server is going to respond when it feels like it. It's not when you feel like it or when you request it. It's going to respond based on the distance from your machine as it tunnels through the network and a bunch of other stuff, right? That's how the server is going to respond. And so a lot of times what we want to use is async functionality, where we're waiting for that response, almost like a promise that the server is going to respond. And as soon as the server is done responding, then we can do something. If we need to wait, that's blocking, which means I can't do anything until the server does something. The other way to do it is non-blocking, which means I can continue doing what I'm doing, and then when the server's finished, it's going to tell me. Then I have extra things that I'm going to do. And a good example of that is if you go to the website, and then once you get there, you see certain things start to load one thing at a time, like different images, like almost like a lazy loading experience. That's okay for websites. Maybe not okay for video games. Like imagine you're going to, towards a place in your level, and you see that it's kind of loading. It's not finished loading it. It's over here. It's kind of phasing in. You see something going on, and as you come closer, yeah, it's there now. And then when you leave, it's like phased out. It's gone. You get to manage all that stuff. If it's in your visibility, right, when it comes to loading and unloading resources, if your player can see it in line of sight, there should be no loading and unloading within the player side. It's got to be completely seamless for the player. The player shouldn't see that kind of stuff. You do it behind the scenes. That's how it should be. Or otherwise, you're breaking the immersion for your player. So should block unload. Typically, what I do with those ones, I would recommend not to do that. Should block unload. Should block on unload. But sometimes it might solve a problem that you're facing. So when you're using scripted control, that's when it's really good. If you want to use blueprint streaming, some kind of cinematic timing, like you want to show some kind of cutscene or whatever, or manual trigger control, like you move from one place to the other, you're going through a portal, and or you're going down an elevator, which is the better one, because the level's way up here, and you have time to unload that level, reclaim some memory, for your system and for resources, and then now at the bottom you're loading that level, and then when you're down there, just like in Fallout, hopefully it won't take too long, right? Now that level's loaded, and you come off the elevator, and there it is, kind of thing. But it's a really good transition. Going through a gateway is another way of doing that kind of stuff, which is not necessarily a hard load, just you're unloading some resources and loading other ones, that kind of stuff. The other way to do it is level streaming volumes, and the way this works is it automatically loads sublevels when the player enters a place. So that's what happens. It kind of like slaps them together. It kind of does that, and then automatically removes them. So no blueprint. You don't need a blueprint for this one. It's more intuitive, and it's really good for interiors and exteriors. So we're going to talk about how to do that again, weeks 8 and 9, but there's less precise control, and you can get really finicky, weird stuff happening. Like we pass through a trigger over and over again, as an example. If you don't place that properly, it's like, things are happening, your game is slowing right down because you're like loading and unloading things. What's the trigger? What's the trigger when you go there, and what's the trigger when you come back? Like you can't just like walk through a threshold over and over again and make your engine spin. You don't want that to happen, right? So you have to be really careful about how you design that stuff. So you got to figure out to design your geometry and your level layout so to hide that that thing from happening. So it's less control. And the other one is using a world partition. So world partitions is something that's been in Unreal Engine 5. They introduced it, and it kind of divides the worlds into like a division scheme. So they break it into a grid. Grids. We're going to talk about grids in the second half of AI too. But that's what they do. They break it down into grids, and what they do is as you kind of move into that area, it loads that part of the world, and it uses level of detail, right? A hierarchical level of detail a lot of times to load the stuff that your player can see. You can decide how that works and how far they can see. You can use things like fog and that kind of stuff, and atmosphere, world atmosphere, and that kind of stuff in Unreal Engine to kind of squirrel away the fact that you can't see that far, and there's a reason for it. Level of detail is really great for seeing objects that are far away. Like for example, a tree that's really, really close might be massive, and you can see all the detail in the bark and the leaves and everything else. But far away, it's a pixel, right? I mean, that's level of detail. You don't want to be able to, and then there's kind of that middle space. Like how much do you see of that tree when you're like in that middle distance? Like you're not quite far enough to be a pixel, but how much detail do you see in that tree? Do you see the branches moving too, or do you just see an outline? Do you see the silhouette? So there's ways that you can optimize things with your engine in order for you to do that. Reducing enemy actor tick rate, I think it's a great thing. Yeah, it's a great idea, because again, or even here's the other thing to do. Like if they're really, really far away, right? Should you even see them? Should you really just like stop the AI from working altogether? Kind of thing. Because at the end of the day, just because your enemy is on the world, unless that's the kind of game you want to play, like you want to play a game where your world is going with you or without you, right? If that's the game you're playing, that's fine, but that's a lot of upkeep for the computer, right? To kind of keep all that stuff going in the game world, especially if it's a large open world, right? So actor tick is important. You can reduce the updates that they get. That's what that does. But the other thing that you want to do is just turn them off. Like you just want to say like, once I'm out of the area, and maybe it's far enough away, then just they're not relevant anymore. Remember that whole idea of relevance is what you're really doing. It still applies, even though it's not multiplayer. It still applies to kind of transitioning. So that's world partitioning. So really great for large open world exteriors, that kind of stuff. Streaming landscapes, like with a lot of detail, lots of trees and foliage and all that kind of stuff. You know, that's what it's really great for. Not so great for interior, right? So you could use it, but I don't recommend it. Okay, and at least not for now. Maybe in the future of Unreal Engine 5 when they, or whatever the next version is that they're going to come up with, 6 clearly, but I mean, I don't know which one it's going to be. Maybe they'll make it so that you can partition your interior levels as well, especially with all the detail that developers are adding these days. But right now, it's not that great. It doesn't work great, doesn't look great, doesn't feel great, right? If you try and do it, could you do it? Yes, you can. So really, to me, I always think about, you know, if I'm going to use streaming, which I think is recommended, and we're going to talk about how to do that, then it works best when you're, like we said earlier, the player cannot see too far ahead. So what you want to do is, when you're planning your level, corners, things that block sight lines. You know, you're not going to be able to see from straight through the entire dungeon from the beginning to the end. I always think about things like, you know, when I was playing Dungeons and Dragons, Temple of Elemental Evil. You could see right through. If you actually have, you know, the original dungeon module for that kind of stuff, the way it's been designed, it's this massive temple, and you can see like right through. And I always thought that it was like not great design. And what people have done, of course, is like there's portcullises and different kinds of areas in the temple that you could, you know, that stop you from seeing, but still you can see quite far. That doesn't really work well for streaming. If you can see right through like this massive level and you can see a large area far away, then level of detail becomes weird. You see like almost like a fog. You know, again, it can break a player out of immersion. So elevation. So if, you know, we talked last week and the week before about verticality. So anything like that where I have to go up or I have to come down. When I'm going up or coming down, that's a great opportunity for you to do streaming, because maybe the level below is where you're gonna unload the stuff that you're not able to see. And it goes beyond, you know, culling, like not rendering it. It's not the rendering part; it's the updates, like what you're talking about, Logan. So anything like that. So other techniques we talked about is all the transition spaces, hallways and stairwells, elevation drops, door animation delay. Door opens up. Okay, you're streaming. You're unloading something and loading something else. Elevators and lifts. You know, that kind of stuff is a really cool thing. And then and again, I have to stress this again. Never let the player see your unloaded geometry. That's really bad. Okay. And by the way, modern games still do this kind of stuff where they take time to load. I remember playing Cyberpunk 2077, and there's all kinds of stuff that happened in that when it first came out. It still happens sometimes. All right. So the other one is watch your player orientation. So again, you're transitioning from one place to the other. Be consistent. Okay, so try not to rotate the character completely unexpectedly. Like if it's rotating, it's in a context. You're rotating because your elevator is rotating, or you have some weird thing that's happening that you're rotating around, right? If you're rotated in the wrong direction, it's because that's how that makes sense from a contextual perspective. But otherwise, if you're going to completely rotate them and you're looking at a different angle altogether, that's really challenging to look at. Like especially if you're not playing a first-person perspective game. Rotation doesn't matter in a first-person perspective game for the most part. I mean, you're looking where the camera's looking. But if you're a third-person perspective, if you're playing from a third person and somehow the game has rotated your camera so that your camera boom is looking from a different angle than when you entered, that's weird. It becomes really, you know, again, it can break the immersion and also like be like, hey, what the hell? How come my camera moved? And the other one would be VR. We don't talk about VR a lot, but I got to talk about that as well. If you're playing a VR game and you're teleporting, and all of a sudden now, like for whatever reason, your perspective is completely different somehow, or you've moved you can make them sick. So be careful about that with VR when you're transitioning from one level to the other. So again, one thing we have to keep in mind when we're moving from interior to exterior is gradual light exposure. We don't want them to be like shocked, okay? Because they get that they're going to have that problem. You know, think about that framed exit again. This is where we're moving forward. Once we go through this portal, you know that you're going to the outside. Exterior to interior, you want to reduce visibility gradually. You want to kind of, again, that whole expansion to contraction thing where you're moving into like a corridor or a cave or something like that. You want to compress space intentionally. You don't want to do it like just random, because that's how it is. So think about what your player's feeling, when they're doing that. And then orientation is really critical for comfort. And then lighting continuity is an important thing to think about as well. We're going to talk about lighting today a bit. So again, lower exposure when it comes to interior lights, more shadow contrast. When it comes to interior lights is good. Exterior lighting, especially with Unreal Engine, you're going to use a directional light. You're going to have skylight. You're going to have global illumination. You're going to have all really good things to make it look like it's outside. An ambient light is going to be more on the outside than on the inside. And one thing that we're going to be talking about when it comes to lighting very soon is post-process volume control. So we're going to actually do that in our lab. We're going to kind of, in the second part, when we get together and do things on Unreal Engine, I'm going to use my project and I'm going to show you a couple ways to adjust your post-process volume so that things work better from exterior to interior. And it's going to be something that you need to incorporate with your assignment too. Performance considerations. And then I think we're almost at the place where I'm going to take a short break. Yeah, I got one more slide after this. So transitions. They can cause frame drops, right? Especially when you're loading and unloading. Memory spikes, right? That can happen as well. Asset pop-ins. We don't want that to happen. Oh, that, you didn't see that. There's a tower. It wasn't there before. Oh, there it is now, right? That kind of thing. Again, it's not great. So best practices is sub-levels. If we're going to make sub-levels or, partitions of levels, parts of levels that we want to load, lightweight. Anything is like, really easy to unload and load. Not too big. Definitely use level of detail. Especially from an exterior perspective, like long line of sight. If you can look out of a window when you're inside, of a dungeon or whatever, or a castle or a spaceship, you're looking at a window and you can see the landscape. As an example, level of detail, please. Otherwise, you're going to have your performance is going to tank, right? Definitely test in standalone mode when what that feels like before you do multiplayer. Okay, so I know this is not a multiplayer course, but we, sometimes what happens is, we try and, do everything at once. So what does it feel like to test with one player? If it's really slow with one player, it's going to be deathly slow with like 2 or 3, as an example. And then use your profiling in Unreal Engine. And we'll talk about how to do performance profiling in this course later on. So one thing to note is the streaming is not free. You need to design it carefully if you're going to use streaming at all. Streaming is great because it's not hard loading, right? Hard loading is old school. Streaming is the new way of doing things. But you don't. I kind of say this with everything else. There's, you can't, use the same brush for everything that you need to paint, right? So you need to change your tool, whatever the tool is, the right tool for the job, right tool for the right job, kind of thing. So sometimes. Just because streaming is a modern thing doesn't mean you always must use it. If you need to hard load because that's what makes sense for your game or from a performance perspective, then you do that, right? And if you can stream and if it's awesome, that's great too, right? But you have to do the right things. Last thing before we take a short break is common mistakes when it comes to hard loading. Hard loading without saving your state. That's easy. You hard load it, all your stuff is gone. Very common. Streaming without the idea of occlusion. Like, don't give a direct sight line to everything, because otherwise, if things pop out of the world where you can see them, it, like I said to you before, it breaks that immersion, and you don't want that to happen. Your player spawns in the wrong direction. You're facing a wall when you're spawning or whatever, and the enemy's behind you. Don't want that to happen. And definitely lighting mismatch is a huge thing. As an example, like it's you're going in from one level to the other, and you're coming into a level and there's no reason for the lighting to be bigger, but it is, or smaller, but it is, like, darker. So it's darker or brighter, and you don't know why. There's no reason for it. There's no extra lights or whatever. It's just a brighter area. So those are the things that we want to do. Remember, again, I can't stress this enough. Transition should be invisible to the player. If you're gonna have this. If not, then it's hard loading, and you're gonna do a loading screen. Let's take a short break, and when we come back, what I want to do is I want to talk about lighting and exposure in Unreal Engine, and we're going to use our Unreal Engine's project to talk about it, to discuss how to do it. Okay? So we're going to come back in about 10 minutes. I'm going to get a coffee. Hopefully you guys can do that stuff too, and then when we come back, we'll get moving on this. Maybe I'll have a chance to take out my dog for a break. All right? We'll talk soon. I'll be back in a minute.